Welcome to TOMGIRL, where we talk all things sports, entertainment, fashion, and adventure. Today's guest is an Emmy-award winning sports broadcaster who has announced over 1,200 women's basketball games in her career. She's worked for conferences such as the Big 12, SEC, and Big 10, and for major outlets including ESPN and Fox Sports. Prior to broadcasting, she coached at the University of Nebraska and was a former college athlete herself, playing basketball at Kearney State College. Welcome to the show, Brenda VanLengen.
Thank you, JJ. I'm so glad to be here on this show with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you so much for taking the time. And I got to say, all those accolades, you'll always just be coach to me. That's the first name that comes.
That's right. When I was at the University of Nebraska, JJ played for me, and we have such good memories. I'm sure we'll get into that today, but I'm so glad that we've stayed in touch over all these years. You have had a tremendous career, and it's been so much fun to follow your career.
Well, I just always have such a warm spot for you in my heart because you changed my life as a little, college freshman, actually as a senior, writing and asking to play for Nebraska. So you made this girl's dream come true, and you've changed my life. So I'm so excited I look up to you, and I admire you so much for just you're such an incredible person, but for everything you've accomplished in your career and what you've done for women in sports broadcasting. It's just incredible. And you continue to do so. And especially with this new project you're working on now, you're doing a docuseries called If Not For Them, going over the history and highlighting the history of women's basketball that people don't know about. Tell us about this project.
Well, it's certainly a passion project, and I'm so glad to have coached in my career and had this long broadcasting career, because my whole life has been about sports, and I would not have had the opportunities I had if not for them. I mean, that's why I've called this docuseries If Not For Them. If not for the women and the men who supported them that really built the foundation for college women's sports. And as I started this project, I really was focusing on those years right before the NCAA took over, which was in the early 80s. We were about to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Title IX, and I wanted to help tell the story of those women that really built that foundation. And as I spoke to them, they kept pointing to those that came before them. And so as I researched and read books and talked to people, I realized there had never been a documentary series written on the true history of women's sports and how things got started. And so this docuseries is coming together. It's in production now, where we start really primarily in the 50s, but there's some history before that, and talking to the women that lived it and those that had opportunities across the country in the 50s and 60s, became our leaders when we needed it the most, when the NCAA wasn't interested in women's sports and actually fought against it, and Title IX was passed. And those two things, those leaders that had opportunities came together with those that were denied opportunities, and they created really the foundation for what we have now. And everybody sees what happens now, and 10 million people watched the national championship game for basketball this year on ESPN. Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese became household names. The Women's World Cup, soccer, and the NWSL, volleyball. I mean, you and I are both connected to the University of Nebraska. This month in Lincoln, they're going to host volleyball matches at the football stadium, and 91,000 people are going to come and watch a women's volleyball game at a football stadium. And I mean, what we're experiencing in women's sports right now is unprecedented. But this docuseries is about, how did we get here? Who built the foundation for what we have?
Yeah. Are you going to go to that Nebraska volleyball game?
I'm not. My brother is a volleyball coach in the state of Nebraska. He'll be there. I've got a cousin that's a coach, and she's going to be there, and her family. I am not, but I am really looking forward to hearing all about it.
Yeah, my dad's going as well. We've been talking about it. I'm like, oh, I so wish I could go back for that. It'll be incredible.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. It's going to be epic. I mean, nothing like it, right? Nothing like it has ever happened. It's pretty darn cool.
Awesome. Now, back to the docuseries. I think, you've been watching it, what I've seen of it so far. I was just so enthralled because being a college athlete, even I didn't know so many of those stories that you're uncovering and sharing. Talk about some of the, individual stories or things that maybe surprised you or that you really like have, enjoyed about this research that you've done.
Yeah. Well, through this project, I've been able already to interview over 100 women and the men that supported them. And it's really, it's more than sports. It's more than basketball. It's about women's empowerment and equity and changing social norms and really changing how the culture viewed women at the time. And God, there's so many great stories, but a couple of them that really I think people will be so interested in and go, I had no idea. In the 1950s, there was a team in the panhandle of Texas called the Wayland Baptist Flying Queens, the Hutcherson Flying Queens. They were called the Flying Queens because they had a sponsor. They had a sponsor in the 1950s that provided airplanes for them and flew them all over the country to play in AAU competition. And that was the only place that women could compete in sports. They were a college, but they were one of the only 2 colleges in the country that provided scholarships for women to play basketball. And that's the 1950s. So they flew all over the country. We've got great stories. We've interviewed women that were playing on the teams in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s for the Flying Queen. So that's a great story in and of itself. Marion Washington, who a lot of people know coached at the University of Kansas, has an incredible history. She played in the first national championship game that was just for college teams, and that was in 1969. And a lot of people don't even know about that championship. And she was a player on that team, ended up being one of the first 2 Black women to play for the USA in international competition in basketball, and then was hired at the University of Kansas to be their basketball coach, their women's athletic director. Her story is great. And then 2 more quick ones. This woman named Bessie Stockard is one of the stars of the show. If you watched it, she stood out. Her personality is amazing. She just turned 90 years old, and she grew up in the segregated South. She grew up in Nashville, and she loved sports, but she went to Tuskegee to school, predominantly an HBCU, a Black school in the South, and played basketball, and then also played tennis, and played on the Virginia Slims tour ultimately with Billie Jean King. But she was asked to start a program at Federal City College, a college in the Washington, D.C. area that didn't have a campus, didn't have athletic facilities. And she started a women's basketball program by practicing in high schools all over the country in the 70s, and ended up growing that team to be so successful. They ended up beating the 3-time defending national champion Immaculata College on an NBA court where the Washington Bullets, at the time they were called the Washington Bullets, played, and she ended up getting her team on the front page of the Washington Post because of it. And so she tells that story. And then just another one that really stands out, a woman named Billy Moore. She was born in Kansas. Her father was a coach. She didn't have opportunities to play in high school because they didn't have high school sports in her school in Kansas, in Topeka, in the late 50s and early 60s. But she loved sports, and she ended up going to, I could tell her whole story, but she ended up becoming one of the best coaches of all time. She won 2 national championships, Cal State Fullerton and UCLA, and became our first Olympic coach when we had a team in the 1976 Olympics. And her interview is probably most precious and special because when I interviewed her in person, she was in the final stages of battling cancer, and was in pain while I interviewed her and uncomfortable, but she sat there through the whole interview and just powered through it and shared these amazing stories, and told me as we walked out that, she didn't have much time, and just a couple of months later passed away. And so, to be able to capture that history, she became Pat Summitt's mentor for so many years. And Pat Summitt, of course, influenced generations of people in women's sports. And so, just the stories are amazing. And basically what I want people to know is this docuseries is not just history for history's sake. We want people to know the history, but the personal stories of these women and the men that supported them are really what draws it together and makes it so emotional and so impactful.
Yeah, I think of the clip you sent me, just you could see their passion. And I loved they all had, they just have that spunk and that fight, because they're trailblazers doing this, doing what they're told they're not supposed to do. Women aren't supposed to be playing, things. So what did you find like, those kind of nuggets, like inspiring stories that they had, or like things that they maybe conflicts that we didn't know that they had to go through to get this done, to play basketball?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so many. I mean, a lot of them, because they were positive, strong women, they didn't want to tell a lot of the stories of the battles that they went through because they didn't want to be seen as complaining or whatever. And they wanted to celebrate the triumphs of what was accomplished. So sometimes I had to kind of drag out of them, what some of the things were that they had to endure. And, there were examples. This was a common example, and you and people that are sports fans now, will just be shocked about. But there were games in the 70s when the women would play and they would be in the middle of a game, an official game. And the men's coach would come in and say, "It's time for the men's practice. You all need to get off the court." And there were games. I've had several instances where basically they either forced them off the court or made them have a running clock because they didn't value those women and what they were doing on their campuses. It was all about the men's sports programs up to that point. I mean, culture was that from the like 1920s until the 70s, there were really no school-sponsored women's sports, especially team sports and basketball. And so it really took a lot of fighting and battling and just standing up for what was right for women to even have practice time, to be able to play their games on, courts on campuses. And there were just a lot of discrimination and a lot of things that they had to endure just to fight for the opportunities that we have now.
It's so important that, that people hear all these stories, because I was even talking to you before, and it's like watching this, I realized I just got this feeling of being so grateful for coming through and playing when I played, because from a, third grade, I had opportunities, and just realizing, that my own mom, this hasn't been that long, it's like my own mom did not have these same opportunities. So I just think what you're doing, going back and letting these women tell their stories and have their voices, just is so important for, everybody to hear and know about.
It absolutely is, to know where we came from. And part of my motivation was I found out that my grandmother, who went to high school in the 20s, actually played on a basketball team. And I remember when I was little, her being in the driveway and we kind of made fun of her because she had a granny shot, she threw it up there underhanded, but she played basketball in the 20s. But my mom did not have opportunities in the 60s when she went to school. So I was like, what happened? Like, why did they have opportunities? And then all of a sudden it was shut off. And so that was part of the research that I had no idea. And I found out that after James Naismith invented the game, a woman named Senda Berenson was a PE teacher at Smith College and wanted to adapt that game for girls and women to play. And it became very popular. They changed the rules. It wasn't exactly like the men's game. It was a half-court game where they played 3-on-3 on each end, or actually early the court was split up into 3 parts and you had to stay in your section. But it was still basketball. It was still trying to put the ball in the hoop. And it was very popular for even like a couple of decades into the 20s. It was started in 1892 and into the 20s. It was very popular, but there was this faction of people that were like, wait a minute, we don't like that women are so competitive. We don't like that they're aggressive. Women should be, demure and not be so aggressive like this, and it may hurt their reproductive organs, so they can't have kids. And so honestly, there was this national movement headed by the president's wife, Herbert Hoover's wife, that said women should not compete in team sports. And all across the country, high school programs that had basketball, college programs that had it in their PE classes shut it down. And the only opportunities, maybe in PE class, you could play for fun, but it was not for competition and not to keep score. There was no intercollegiate competition. And so the only opportunities ended up being through this AAU, where companies could sponsor teams in different parts of the country. And then they started playing, and that's really kind of what led to this awareness that, oh, women can compete, and let's make sure that this gets into the college, into the colleges, so that they compete and represent their colleges. So, there's just so much to it that I know people aren't aware of. And like I said, it's more than about sports. It really speaks to how some real cultural and societal norms were changed so that girls and women could have those opportunities in sports.
Mm-hmm. This has been a little different project for you. You're used to being, broadcasting, and now you're wearing the executive producer hat. How has that challenge been for you?
It's been great. I mean, I've been a broadcaster of women's basketball primarily, but women's sports for 28 years. I love it. I love calling games going across the country, and getting the best seat in the house and getting paid to talk about sports. I mean, it's awesome, right? And so taking on this project, I really wanted to honor those that had paved the way so that I have the opportunities that I do. And I've always been a storyteller. And so listening and interviewing these women, first on phone calls, then on Zoom interviews, then in person, I just started gathering all of these stories from all of these women. And it just came to me what this story arc should be, that we should provide representation from all over the country to make sure that we are inclusive of all stories, and give it from players and coaches and administrators' positions, and just really share the stories that either have been forgotten or have never been told. And I want people with this project to come away, like if you saw the movie Hidden Figures, mm-hmm. right? You walked out of Hidden Figures and you're like, I had no idea. I had no idea that these women were behind all of this that happened at NASA. Well, I want people, when they are able to see this docuseries, to be able to say, I had no idea what it took for us to have what we have in women's sports today. And we're still in production. I've done it in phases. So, I've been a little entrepreneurial in my life, and I've worked for different nonprofits, and I've had different things that I've done in addition to broadcasting. I was a coach for a while, but I kind of took all of those things that I have experience in and put it all together and put together a budget. I pitched it to a video production company, and we launched a website, ifnotforthem.com, and we started raising money just through grassroots contributions. And it became really apparent we weren't going to be able to raise the money for the entire thing right away. So the most important part of this was to get the interviews, because a lot of these women that lived through it are now in their 70s, 80s, and some of them their 90s. And so the most important part was to get the interviews. So I raised enough money to go put together a strategic plan and go across the country and interview over 100 women and the men that supported them to capture those stories. And we have over 200 hours of interviews of these stories. I mean, we have so much content. It's incredible. And then our next phase was to produce what you saw, JJ, a preview of each of the 10 episodes, so that people could understand the breadth of the storylines, the quality of the interviews, and really what we've captured. And so now we're in that final fundraising push where we're raising the money for full production of each of those episodes. And so, I've learned a lot through the process. There's still a lot that I reach out to people for consultation and for, just figuring out how to do this in the right way. But it's going to happen. We need to find a few more funders to help it finish. But it's going to come together and be something really special that nobody else has ever done.
How can people help you with the fundraiser if they're out there listening and want to contribute?
Well, check out our website, ifnotforthem.com, and they can contact me through that or through any of the social media platforms, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, LinkedIn, we're at all. I'm on all of those, and our project is on all of those. And so, whether you just think this is a cool idea and you have $100 to give, you can go through the website and do that. If you want to give at a higher level, there are different levels of recognition that are spelled out on the website. If you want to underwrite an entire episode, there are opportunities for that as well. And I'm glad to talk to anybody, because the people that I have spoken to that are passionate about women's issues, women's sports, just making sure that these stories get told, they are really have been the heart of this project, contributing to it and making it happen. And anybody that makes a contribution, you'll receive a link so that you can see that preview of the 10 episodes, so you really get a good idea of what we've put together.
Yeah, that link is excellent. Yeah, definitely going to share that around and try to, get other people to watch that, because it's just so eye-opening. It's wonderful. You guys did a great job. The production quality is excellent. You had a small and mighty team, right?
Yeah, we're pretty efficient. It's a video production team, Real Media, Kansas City, right here in the Kansas City metro area. And we took a team out across the country for these interviews, and packed up like a van and every space of it with all this equipment, and drove all over the country. I mean, we've got some stories just from that. It is amazing. And and then the production company, Brad Burrows, the owner and founder, and he's done a terrific job. And Cecil Searcy worked with me very closely to produce that sneak preview. But not a lot of people involved, but we've been very efficient with the money that we've received. And it doesn't look like a small operation.
Oh.
It looks really, really good. I mean, we made sure that this was done in a quality that it would look great on a big screen. And when we showed this in conjunction with the women's Final Four in Dallas, I think people were blown away by the quality that we've put together.
Yeah, tell me more about that. I saw you posting about that, and I saw that happened. How was that experience?
It was terrific, because we were able to, I wanted, after we did all these interviews, to be able to show people what it is that we had put together. And you can talk about it all you want, and you could say, oh, cool, it's a history documentary about women's basketball. It's like, when you see what we've captured, just the sound bites that these women have shared from their experiences, when these women start talking about these memories they have from 50, 60 years ago, their faces like light up, and it like you can see the young person in them being passionate about telling their story. And so when we put all that together and piece together just highlights of the story, because it's going to be a full 50 to 55-minute episode, 10 episodes when we finish this, but we just put together 5 minutes of highlights to be able to quick hit show people what that was all about. And then we hosted an event. The NCAA actually hosted the event, and quite honestly, the NCAA is not painted in a positive light in this documentary all the time, because they weren't interested in women's sports at the beginning. They fought against Title IX, and not until the women proved that there was an interest in women's sports did they come on board and say, oh yeah, we're going to now bring women's sports under our umbrella. And the fact that the NCAA now was willing to host that event and reveal some of the flaws of their past and their history, I appreciated so much that the NCAA did that. But we hosted it in a really cool theater in Dallas in conjunction with the women's Final Four. We had 250 people there. We had so many that we overflowed the theater, and we had an overflow area with this huge digital wall that people watched it on. And a lot of the people we had interviewed sat there and had tears streaming down their face as they saw this history being shared. And they were fired up, and they're like, let's get this thing completed. This is such important history to share. And it just gave us an opportunity to thank our initial contributors that got this thing started, and then to give an update on where we are and what we need to finish it.
Well, I can't wait to see it when it's the full series. I'll be hooked and riveted.
You and me both.
Yeah, I'll be Netflix binging it or wherever it gets picked up binging.
That's right. That's right. And that's another thing I would just mention is that, I had some decisions at the beginning of this of how to put this together. And you can put it together and you can have investors and people invest in it, or, you can go to, a network or a streaming service and pitch the idea. But what I came to in all of this is that this is such an important story. I want to make sure that it gets told correctly and comprehensively. And, I basically talked to entertainment attorney and other advisors. You introduced me to some people early on, and just some people that had gone through this before. And what I decided to do was set this up in conjunction. I have a fiscal agent that's a nonprofit agency. And so if people want to support this, they're able to give charitable contributions to make this thing grow and make this project a reality. And so I want to be able to fundraise and find the funders that think this is an important project and want to be a part of it, and get this thing funded and fully or nearly fully produced, and then pitch it to the streaming and television networks. I already have some contacts, but am open if people are interested in hearing this and they have some affiliation or association and they want to, have this as part of what they provide distribution wise. I want to be able to do that, but ultimately I want this to be an educational material that can be a part of curriculums in colleges, that are part of leadership studies, that are part of women's studies, sports history, DE&I, just all those things that, because this part of history has been left out and nobody knows about it, and nobody knows what these incredibly strong women did just so we have college women's sports and now professional sports and all this success. I want that to be a part of what people are learning about in the future, because nobody's captured this history in this kind of way. And that way it will, it will be distributed that way and ultimately be housed at the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. So, it's a big circle, it's a big project, but we welcome people who would like to get on board and be a part of it to check us out at ifnotforthem.com.
Yeah, I love it. Love your vision and love that you just had the go-getter attitude to get this done. I can't wait. You are also somebody, you talk about when you interview these women, you can see them like light up talking about, basketball. You have that spark in you where you always, you love sports and you light up with sports. So let's kind of tell people, I would love to talk more about your journey and how you first got it started with sports and with your dad coaching to college, and however you got to where you are now.
Yeah, sports has always been a part of my life. I've always loved it. And, my dad was a coach and teacher, and he even coached girls sports before Title IX. There was a volleyball team at our high school, and I was the little girl that was running around and filling up the water bottles and shagging the volleyballs. And, I just loved being around it. And Title IX hadn't even passed yet. And our school, my small little school in rural Nebraska, did not have basketball for girls when I was young. And it wasn't until I was like 10 years old that the high school got a basketball program. And so I was fortunate, because then in junior high, I got to play basketball probably 3 or 5 games a year, not very many, but I did get to play in high school. And I loved it. We had really good teams in Roseland, Nebraska, because we had a lot of good athletes that were girls, and the community supported it, because I think because we had so many talented female athletes. If you have a big family and you've got girls and boys, you want the same opportunities for your girls that the boys have. And so I think in those rural communities, we experienced that kind of success. And it wasn't until I went to college, and I was recruited a little to, not very much. Recruiting wasn't like what it is now. But I went to high school in the early 80s, and I was recruited to play basketball at Kearney State College, which is now University of Nebraska, Kearney. And, it was there that I got my first taste of oh yeah, girls aren't, women aren't being treated the same and don't have the same opportunities that guys do. And, our locker room was small and we shared it with all the PE people. And when we traveled to games, we stuffed 12 players, 2 coaches, and a trainer in a 15-passenger van with all of our luggage to, travel across the Midwest. And, it was challenging, but it was an opportunity. I was getting to play college basketball. And I always knew that I wanted a career involved with sports. And I thought really my only path would be to be a teacher and a coach. And so I got my degree is in business education. I started as a high school business teacher and a coach. But because of the experience I had as a college athlete, I wanted to be involved with college sports. And so I ended up reaching out to Angela Beck, the head coach at the University of Nebraska, and said, I'd love to be on your coaching staff. And she invited me to work her camps in the summer. And then I was hired as a grad assistant. And then I was elevated to full-time assistant. And that's when I met you. And, people, get a chance to hear your podcast and know a little bit of your story. But you, along with the current coach at the University of Nebraska, Amy Williams, who was Amy Gusso at the time, you two came on as walk-ons on that program and basically asked for the opportunity. And then you came out and worked so hard that we as a coaching staff, there was no way we could deny you both the opportunity because you worked harder than anybody out there and you elevated everybody's energy and work ethic. And, because you did that, you made the team better. And I appreciate you saying that I had a part in changing your life because of that opportunity, but you earned it. You absolutely earned it. And it's why you've been so successful in your career as well.
Oh, make me tear up. Yeah, it really was. I look back as one of the most important moments of my life, writing that letter to ask you guys if I could have the opportunity to walk on and meeting Amy, who's still my dear best friend to this day, and seeing her coach now just makes me so happy. And just, I remember being in, I remember coming home from games and we were roommates together and she'd just be breaking down the game, for hours, like afterwards about play by play. So I knew then that she had that coach in her, to come back and do that. But no, I just appreciate you and Nebraska and, all the opportunities that the University of Nebraska gives women in sports. But back to you. So so then I wanted you to tell your story about getting into broadcasting. And then there's one story that I've heard you tell in talks that I would love for you to share with everybody about when you got your first big broadcasting break.
My first big break, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I've been so fortunate and it's just been a charmed life in a lot of ways. When I left the University of Nebraska, I thought I either wanted to be a coach at a smaller school or just get out of coaching and more into sports marketing and event management and things like that. But I didn't want to lose touch with the game. And so Nebraska Public Television, Nebraska Public Media, what they call themselves now, I think they were way ahead of them. They were way ahead of the times in that they were broadcasting women's basketball on television way before most anybody in the country. They were broadcasting games in the 80s and 90s, way before a lot of women's sports networks were broadcasting games. And so I went back to the Nebraska Public Television people because they did like 3 games a year. And I said, hey, I don't have a broadcast journalism degree, but I love the sport. I know the coaches and the players, and I love to talk, so would you give me a chance? And so that's how I got into broadcasting, was through Nebraska Public Television. Kevin Kugler, who, now is a tremendous play-by-play announcer in NFL and, NBA and college sports, was he and I kind of got started together with Nebraska Public Television. Recently we worked together and they pulled up some old archive video footage and we're like, oh my God, how did we both ever get into this? We did like a 5-minute open for a game and just talked and oh my God, it was hilarious. But that's how I got started. I did those 3 games per year for the University of Nebraska. I moved down to the Kansas City area and got connected with a sports technology company down there called Coach's Edge. I did a game or 2 a year for the University of Kansas, like on ESPN Regional at the time. And I really wanted to I loved it. I loved being able to talk about the game and break down the strategies. And I loved being connected to the game that way. But, I was doing like 3 or 4 games a year. And the Big 12 conference was just forming. Now, all of the stuff going on with the Big 12 conference, it's not what it used to be. But the Big 12 conference was just forming in the 96-97 year. And I really wanted to be a part of their television package because Fox Sports had made a contract with the Big 12 to have a really good television package for Big 12 women's basketball. And so I was trying to make connections and so forth. And I got a job as the executive director for the women's Final Four that was held in Kansas City in 1998. I got to meet Pat Summitt in person as they were going for their 3rd straight national championship. It was a terrific job, and I absolutely loved it, but I was only doing about 3 or 4 games a year. And I was like, how can I break through? How can I do more? And that's when my lucky break happened. And so here I am in Kansas City, and a friend of mine, her name's Patty Phillips, who is now the leader of Women Leaders in College Sports, which is a phenomenal organization. But she and I were friends, and she had her 10-year-old niece, and we went over with a group of people to KU, to Allen Fieldhouse, and it was take a girl to the game day, and there's this huge line out the door. And I was like, I don't want to stand in this long line. I'm going to sneak around to the media entrance because I've done a few games for them. And I snuck around to try to, get inside, because there were some people I wanted to talk to before the game started and all of this because, of all the work I was doing with the Final Four. So I walk in, and the sports information guy says, "Oh, good, you're here." And I said, "Oh, good, because I just snuck in the door. Thank you." And he said, "Are you ready?" I said, ready for what? The game? Yeah. He goes, "No, to do the national television broadcast today." I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "No, I'm just here to watch the game." He said, "Well, Fox Sports is televising this game nationally, and the analyst for the game didn't show up. And so they need somebody to do the game, and that starts in 15 minutes. So are you in?" I'm like, "Hell yes, I'm in. Let's go." But I was so nervous. And I mean, usually even up to that point, when I prepared for a game, I did studying and put together notes and watch game film and all of this. So to just walk in and call a game was a stretch. But I knew the KU team, and I knew K-State, and I put on my headset, and my play-by-play partner looked at me like, "Who in the world did we just pull off the street to do this game?" And luckily it was a good game, and I called it. And afterwards, my producer said, "Hey, come out to the truck. I want to talk to you." And said, "You're pretty good at this. Would you like to do more games?" And I said, "Absolutely." And it's what launched my career. I mean, a lucky break. I walk in and had this opportunity, and luckily I was prepared and performed well, and it really launched my career.
I just love the story. I listened to, you did a TED Talk on it. And I just think about that. And I'm like, it's so amazing to say yes and to do it, and to not let, I think so many times in life, we let that fear or the doubt or those other thoughts creep in, and you didn't. You just went for it and stepped into it.
Yeah. And it's part of what I talk about in that TED Talk and other speeches that I do, because how many times in life are we offered an opportunity and we're afraid that we might fail, or we don't think we're quite prepared enough? And I think especially as women, I think so many times we think that we need to be prepared completely perfectly in order to try something. And I think that moment taught me that sometimes you just have to go. You just have to trust that your training, your preparation has prepared you for this moment, and you go for it. And I think it's helped me in my life be more of a risk taker, more willing to try things that are uncomfortable and are stretch. And it's part of this If Not For Them project. I've never produced a docuseries before, but I've told stories of women's basketball for years and years. And I want to pay homage to those women that blaze the trails. And so I'm stretching, doing something I've never done before to really do something that's never been done before.
Mm-hmm. And in some of you spoke at the K-State graduation ceremony as well. Some of the other motivational things that you say now, for people out there listening that maybe could utilize some of these tips that you have, what are some things that you touch on in your speeches?
You know, I really talk about that stretch, you know, dreaming beyond your comfort zone. Think about what you can accomplish that seems impossible, because if you would have told me when I was in high school or college that my career would be as a sports broadcaster calling women's basketball games on TV, I never would have believed it, because it wasn't available at that time. And so sometimes you have to stretch and dream bigger than you can even imagine to accomplish the things that you want to in your life. And you have to be willing to take risks, like I said, and step out of your comfort zone. And you have to approach things with just enthusiasm and just courage and bravery. And, you know, I talk about appreciation, showing people appreciation that have helped you get to where you are, because you never get anywhere on your own. It's a team of people, whether it's coaches or teachers or, you know, colleagues or your former players or whomever, you know, being appreciative of those people, and then just being willing to make it happen and decide, if this is going to happen, I need to do it. And I'm going to step forward in faith and in courage and make it happen. And that's my message when I speak to groups a lot of times. And it's how I've tried to live my life. And now, as I have a niece and nephews that are, you know, into college and looking at their futures. You know, I just had a Zoom call with my nephew Cade yesterday, because he wants to get into sports broadcasting, and, you know, provided him some encouragement and some ways that he can prepare and, you know, prepare for broadcast and prepare his way of thinking for how he does those things. And, you know, I'm at that point in my career where I want to be a mentor for others and help them to find their courage, find their authentic path, and just to step out of their comfort zone and make things happen. Because, you know, just nothing has ever happened great that didn't have an enthusiastic, passionate person behind it making it happen. And so that's a big part of my message.
Yeah. So talk about from that first time you said yes to this, you did that job when, you know, you could have just said, no, I'm not prepared. I didn't. And now your whole career just, you know, took off from there. There's so much to talk about with your career, because you've done so many, but are there maybe touch on maybe some of your favorite games you've worked or highlights of your career that really, you know, mean a lot to you?
Yeah, absolutely. My career grew from that time that I got that first exposure. The first time I did a Fox Sports game, the day after my sister's wedding, you know, I could have not prepared as well, because I was I was in her wedding and we partied the night before. But that game that I did the next day was seen by ESPN, and they invited me then to be a part of their team. And so I grew, and I've been a part of calling those NCAA tournament games for a very long time. And, you know, being a part of being able to tell those stories has been so important to me. I also, because of that sports technology company that I worked on behind the scenes, we did this animated software that showed the circles move on the basketball court to explain the movement and the pacing of plays. Well, that allowed me to work behind the scenes for ESPN. And I've worked behind the scenes for 15 national championship games in women's basketball, and some NBA games and WNBA championships as well, where there's circles and movement on the court that explain it. Sometimes that's me in the background creating those things. So that's been really special to be a part of those production teams at ESPN that's a part of the national championships. I got to call 6 or 7 NCAA Division II national championships, and 2 of them were at my alma mater at the University of Nebraska, Kearney. So I got to go back to where I played basketball and call a national championship game on television. So that was pretty special and pretty incredible. And then I got invited by a group that was televising the World University Games about 10 years ago. They were in Russia, which I've been telling people lately. Thankfully, I did that 10 years ago and not now. But I went to Kazan, Russia, and I called 15 games: beach volleyball, men's basketball, women's basketball. But the most special game was calling the gold medal game where the U.S. defeated the Russian team. And it was this arena where, 95% of the fans were Russian, and, a very small contingent of people from the United States were there. And you'll appreciate this as a small town Nebraska girl, right? Jordan Hooper, who played for the University of Nebraska, who is from a small town in Nebraska, got to start on that team. And she hit a 3-pointer early in the game. And I was able to reference the call that Matt Coatney, the voice of Husker women's basketball on the radio, says when a 3-pointer's made is "you betcha." And so on this international broadcast, I said "you betcha" when Jordan Hooper made the 3. And so, like, this whole full circle life thing is going on with my Nebraska connections, but being able to call this game where the United States wins the gold medal, it's pretty special. I've been so blessed. I have so many great memories over the years, and have been able to call a lot of games. And I was an analyst. When you watch a game, there's play-by-play and there's an analyst. There's 2 announcers. And I was the analyst as the former coach and player for a lot of years. But I shifted over about halfway through to be a play-by-play announcer as well, because a lot of networks were asking me to be a play-by-play announcer. And even though I didn't have technical training in it, I think they were seeing opportunities that I wasn't aware of, and they were seeing things in me that they thought that I could do that. And by shifting over to be the play-by-play announcer has opened up a completely new opportunities for me, because I've got to work beside some of the best coaches and players in the history of the game as the analyst, to be able to set them up. And, everybody from Candace Parker, who of course is now on, TNT with NBA coverage. She did some of her first games with me, beside me, for ESPN. And Asia Wilson, who plays for the Las Vegas Aces in the WNBA, and Andrea Carter, who was just out of college at Tennessee, and she sat beside me and worked with me for a couple of years, and now she's one of the biggest stars on ESPN in all the sports. And so the fact that I've gotten to work beside some of the best players and coaches in the game has been just phenomenal. Here I am, small town girl from Roseland, Nebraska, and have got to be a part of all these incredible broadcasts across the country.
Yeah. And you did so much of it yourself, because you don't have an agent, correct? Or you did it.
That's right.
Yeah. So talk about some people who are out there in the small towns that want to dream to be you when they grow up. Give some advice of like how you've done this all by yourself and how you created this.
Well, that's a really good question, and it's kind of been step by step. And I don't have an agent, and a lot of people in our industry do. But I think because of partly because of the timing, as my career kind of grew with the explosion of women's basketball being on television, where I was able to do a few local broadcasts and then moved up to do those Big 12 broadcasts on Fox, and then was seen by ESPN. It was partly the work that I was doing. People were recognizing my work and asking me for things, and my willingness to say yes. And I learned early that don't turn down any job because you think it's too small. Like, take on any opportunities that you can. And then when I was asked to be play-by-play, I was hesitant at first because, when you watch a game and you listen to the play-by-play announcer and the analyst, they are completely opposite in how they watch the game and when they comment and so forth. So when I go to play-by-play, I have to like switch my brain to think about it differently, about what my role is and what I'm supposed to be doing as my role on the broadcast and so forth. And I mean, it was a stretch. It was absolutely a stretch. And it took me a few years. And I am definitely not a typical play-by-play announcer, a highly trained Syracuse University professional play-by-play announcer. I'm a play-by-play announcer that knows the game and loves the game and can set up my partner because of the experiences that I've had and how I want to be able to tell the stories. And so that's, that would be my advice for people is you don't have to fit in a box. You don't have to be exactly what has always been done. I think there are so many changes happening in all of sports broadcasting and television overall that new worlds are going to be opening up, and being open to and being willing to take risks and try new things and use your strengths, things that you're good at, things that you have been able to develop over the years and you can hang your hat on. That might just be the pathway to the next big thing. You don't have to be traditional. You don't have to do it like everybody else has always done it. Carve your own path and open up things, because that's, I besides being the analyst and then being play-by-play and then being willing to be in the production truck behind the scenes, that's what's opened up all these doors for me, is that I'm flexible and can do all these different things and kind of adapt to what's needed and what my strengths are. So that's what I really encourage people listening. I don't care what industry you're in. Understand your strengths, understand what you do well, because when you have a job or you work at something that is not in your strength, it's a grind. It's hard. You have to push through. It's difficult. But when you are working in your strength and your area of passion, it doesn't seem like a job at all. It's just, you enjoy it, you love it, you pour into it, it gives back to you, you give to the people around you. Find your strengths and find a job that allows you to play to your strengths, because that's where you'll get the most fulfillment, and it won't seem like you're working at all.
Yeah, love what you do. How do you process? What's your process like when you're getting ready for a game?
I want to be well prepared. I do a lot of studying, whether online. The universities usually do a really good job of providing information through their media relations office about stats and storylines and things like that. But digging in and reading articles that have been written, watching a lot of game film, setting up meetings with the coaches ahead of time to be able to gather information, and then I try to put it together in a very organized way, so that I am prepared when the game comes. And then, when it starts, then you call the game. You have all this background, you have all this information, but you call the game, but you reference the things that and you have learned about during the course of it. I think some people that get into broadcasting, they want to show how much they know, and they want to show how much that they've studied and all that they've gathered, and they provide too much information. It's too much for people to listen to and really soak in and listen. And so it's important to be able to tell things concisely. I've learned through my time at ESPN and some great mentors that I've had, let it breathe. You don't have to talk all the time. There can be dead air. Let people hear the crowd interaction and things like that. But it's really important to be prepared, because they're going to be, in sports, anything is possible, right? And you have to be prepared, whether it's to know the rules or to know a backstory or to know some history or whatever, because something might come up in the game. If you're not prepared, you may not be able to reference those things, and you want to be able to bring all those stories together to make it really compelling and interesting for people to watch.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you so much for sharing. These are great tips for everybody out there. I could seriously talk to you for hours. I've kept you so long. But before I let you go, I do want to talk about one more thing that I know that you did that I find so interesting. You're still an athlete, but you did a half Ironman. Tell me about this. I'm like, whoa.
Wow. Yeah. Well, as a former athlete, I I always, like to go out and shoot baskets, or I wanted to stay in shape. But over the years, I started, gaining some weight and not being as fit as I wanted to be. And I ended up in my early 40s getting involved with a sprint triathlon because an old friend of mine who was a student manager for our team, Marsha Merrill, wanted to do a triathlon, but there weren't any around Lincoln. So I said, hey, there's this women only triathlon in Kansas City. If you come down to it, I'll get ready with you. And I really didn't think she would do it. And then she said yes. And then I was like, oh shit. I mean, because at the time I wasn't even a very good swimmer. I mean, I could swim, but I had never swam for distance at all. And I had to learn how to swim. The first sprint triathlon I did the breaststroke, the side stroke, the backstroke, because I didn't want to stick my face in the water in the lake. And it made me like hyperventilate and all of this stuff. So I had to get through that fear. And it's another one of my stories. Like, you have to push through your fear sometimes. And I did those sprint triathlons for several years. And then I started working out with a trainer, and he's like, you should do like a half Ironman. I'm like, I can barely do a 500-meter swim. There's no way that I can do the swim that's required for a half Ironman. And he really worked with me to build my confidence to swim, to freestyle, stick your face in the water, learn how to breathe, all that stuff. And it's like, I knew once that I did that, I could do the rest of it. And so I was going through some transition in my life, and it was like, I needed something to like really push myself and to focus on. And so I signed up for this half Ironman. And then I found out, if you don't do the swim in a certain amount of time, they basically pull you out of the water and you don't get to finish the whole thing. Or if you don't do the bike in a certain amount of time, or if you don't do the run, it doesn't count as being completed. And I'm competitive enough that I'm like, hell no, if I'm going if I'm going to work out and train for this thing, there's no way that I'm not going to do this. So, I mean, I am not like a world-class triathlete or anything like that. I just did it to prove to myself that I could, and to help myself be more fit. And I get there the day of it, and there'd been this big storm move through. And so I knew that I could swim about a 45 minutes. I can't even remember what the distance is now, like half a mile or something. But you had to get done in an hour and 10 minutes. So I knew I could do it, but I got out in the water and the waves were so big that I'd come up and I'd get splashed. And I was like, oh my God, this is how people die. Like, this is not good. And I was freaked out. And I went to the famous philosopher Dory, who said, just keep swimming, right?
Yes.
And I swam, and I just one stroke after another, and I got in at like 103 and beat the 110 cutoff. So I made it. And then I got on my bike, and I was like 20 minutes below the cutoff. And then I ran the half marathon, and I got about 10 miles of the 13, and my legs felt like lead. And it was like, just keep moving, just one foot in front of the other. And 80 people signed up in my age group. I was, I was 52 at the time. 5 years ago, 80 people signed up, and I placed 50, and I placed 50th, and the official record says I was 50th out of 50. So that means 30 people didn't finish. So I beat all of those people, but I was last place of the people that finished, but I finished. And it was like one of the biggest, like, I did that sort of moments of my life, and kind of like reinforced, like, you can do anything you set your mind to. And it was a huge deal. And it was once in a lifetime. Don't plan on doing it again, but pretty proud that I was able to finish before they yanked me off the course.
Yeah, you should be proud. That's a huge accomplishment. I can't even like fathom. I've done some sprints, and I was telling you, doing a marathon in a week here, and I'm just like, oh, an Ironman, half Ironman. I was like, wow, she's a badass. That's amazing. But good for you.
It's kind of cool. It was a good way to stay fit, and that's important as we get older. Being strong and being fit and taking care of ourselves, it's an important part of what we do. And as I interviewed people for this If Not For Them docuseries, I interviewed women in their 90s, and they, because they were involved with athletics in their life, and they have stayed fit, and they have stayed focused, they're just amazing. And so they've been an inspiration for me too. And I think people that get involved with this project, and check it out at our website, ifnotforthem.com, they'll see, what remarkable women these are and how inspirational they are.
Yeah, exactly. So you just gave the website again. Tell everybody again, like where they can follow you on your social handles, or how they can just learn more about this project.
Sure, absolutely. You can follow me, Brenda VanLengen, on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Threads. But we also have If Not For Them accounts set up on all of those too. So you can follow specifically the project and learn more about how to get involved and learn about storylines and things like that through our social media, through our website, ifnotforthem.com. Again, there's still opportunities for people to get involved, whether you just want to support it in a small way, or whether you have a lot of money that you want to make a tax deductible contribution and be a big part of this project. All are welcome. It's taken over 300 people making contributions of different sizes to get to the point where we are. We still have money to raise, but it's going to get finished, and we'd love to have people be involved and be a part of revealing this important history.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today to share all the story with us and share your story with us. I cannot wait to see it when it's done, and I can't wait to watch the journey as you continue to develop it and promote it, and just watch how it's going to impact everybody's lives. So thank you, JJ, for doing such a great project. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to be on. I love watching your podcast, and I'm very excited to have been invited to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thanks. All right, guys, thank you for watching too. And you can follow us everywhere at TOMGIRL TV, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out the YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you here again next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.